Thank you for visiting my channel. My name is David Hadaway, and for this first video, I'd like to share with you the story of my uncle, David Hadaway. David was 19 years old when he was murdered in Columbus, Ohio on July 21st, 1986. His body was found in a dumpster near the campus of The Ohio State University, and his murder remains unsolved. This video I'm making today is part one of two videos that I will be creating for this channel. And today I just want to tell you a little bit about David, his life, and the memories he left behind. And in part two, I'll share with you the details of his murder and the aftermath of the tragedy in my life and in the lives of those I love. Why am I doing this? Why am I sharing with you this family trauma that happened 36 years ago? I feel compelled for a number of reasons. Number one, I was 14 years old when David was murdered, and I've always felt some sort of debt to David's memory, to my family, to kind of keep his memory alive. We were relatively close in age. Even though he was my uncle, he was more like a cousin because we were very close in age. He was only 5 years older than me. The majority of my cousins on the Hadaway side do not have memory of David, several who do, but I want to leave something behind for those that don't. And I feel like as David's oldest nephew, I remember him well, and I do have memories I want to share. And I also have memories that are fading. You know, I'm getting older, and of course the details start to become fuzzy about his life and my early life, where I knew David. Another reason is I started in my career, I was a teacher for many years. I started my teaching career in the 90s, and I survived by learning to tell stories and share stories, and I feel like I'm ready to share David's story with a larger group of people, not just my family, but others who might care about his case. And again, I try to connect what is interesting with what is mundane, and you specialize that when you're a teacher. And I feel like I'm ready to tell that story in the information age 36 years later. I also run a Facebook group called Cold Case Justice for David G. Hadaway, and I hope you will join our Facebook group and find inspiration and hope, and maybe you can honor David just by being part of that. Many of those in the group are his friends that knew him growing up, definitely family members. I will say this: I'm not a, I do enjoy watching true crime things, but it's not the top of my list. I'm not one of those internet sleuths, and I really have not been actively trying to solve or push for a resolution of David's case. Not that I don't want it to be solved, I certainly do, but I feel compelled more to share it with others. Maybe those that have interest in things like that could do that. Not everyone out there has had the unspeakable trauma that my family has experienced through David's murder, but there are those out there who wish to carry the burden with you, and I'm thankful for those people. So I'm going to put a link in the description if you'd like to join that Facebook group. I'm going to also put some other links in the description, any links I can find about David's case that might interest you. So let me talk a little bit more about David and his life. David was born on April 2nd, 1967 in Columbus, Ohio, and that's where he would live the remainder of his life. He was the second youngest of 9 children. My father was the oldest child, and I am my dad's oldest child, so that means David and I were fairly close in age. He was probably 4 years old when I was born, close to 5. And when I was very young, my parents both worked, and my grandma Helen, who's David's mother, my father's mother, my grandma Helen, would babysit me. Most of my aunt and uncles, when I was a baby and a toddler and young, still lived at home at the time, so I was surrounded by love and attention from my dad's sisters. And mom would pick me up late at night, and young David would often pester my mom to ask if he'd come over to our house and spend the night. And that desire David had to be with me, my mom, and my dad, and my younger brother and sister would remain. David and my Aunt Julie would stay with us a lot over the summer in the early 1980s. We lived out in the country, about 45 minutes north of Columbus, and spent our summers just like most other kids did during that time. We rode bikes, we played with neighborhood kids, we fought with the neighborhood kids, we fought with each other, certainly. And of course, when Dad had enough, he'd send us into the garden to pick weeds or do the thousands of other chores that you do on a small farm. What was David like? David he loved his family. He came from a large family. Of course, all of his brothers and sisters. He had about 10 nieces and nephews at the time he died. Again, he was only 19 years old when he died, but he still had a big number of nieces and nephews. I'm certain he would have loved to see how many there are now, because most of us, of that group, that initial 10, we have children now. And of course, that number has grown exponentially since David died. What else about David? He was certainly patriotic. Before he died, he was seriously considering joining the Navy. My grandpa Hadaway, his father, was a World War II veteran. David loved America. He spoke highly of his father's service, and occasionally my Uncle Danny would do things to push his buttons. He knew how sensitive David was about patriotism in America and the military. So if David would be talking about how great America's military is, Danny would say, push his button, say something positive about the Russians or MiG fighters, or make fun of Top Gun, which had been released in 1986, that May. Reagan was a very popular president. America just seemed to be pretty awesome. And David always got upset if somebody picked on America or picked on the military. He was highly patriotic. He loved Ohio State. He loved the Buckeyes. He loved the football team. He loved the basketball team. Like so many young men, he loved sports. He was very fast. He could run like a deer, as my dad would say. He was extremely quick, and we always marveled at how fast he could run. He was a music fan. He loved Paul McCartney and Wings. And I just realized while making this that Paul McCartney just celebrated his 80th birthday, and David never made it to his 20th birthday. It's just ironic to me for some reason. But he loved Paul McCartney. He liked Fleetwood Mac. He liked Stevie Nicks, and he would sing songs. And also, he misheard the lyrics a lot. He would sing the lyrics, and I'd be like, those are not the words to the song, but he tried. David also went to Mifflin High School, and he just finished his senior year. Fortunately, he was one class short of graduation before he died. He was taking summer school biology so he could get his diploma. It's something I distinctly remember walking into his bedroom after his body was found and seeing his biology work text, some of his homework lying there unfinished. Because he had been taking that summer school class. So as far as I know, he never did get his diploma, although he did finish his senior year, just one class short of graduation. Let's talk about the weekend of David's murder, Friday, July 18th through Sunday, July 20th. The last time I saw David alive was Friday, July 18th, 1986, about 3 p.m. in the afternoon. This was 3 days before his body was found on Monday, the 21st. This was my grandpa and grandma Hadaway's house in Columbus, where they lived with David. It was the house my father and his siblings grew up in, and it was also the last place we saw David alive that Friday. So that weekend, we all met at this house, me, my mom, my family, and we were going to meet with grandma and grandpa. And we were going to go down to a wedding in southeastern Ohio where my grandma's family lived. So my family And my grandma and grandpa, we all got in a station wagon and we made that half-hour trip down Route 33 to southeastern Ohio. Now, David, he stayed behind. He stayed behind because he had to go to work. He worked at the Sears warehouse. And he had to mow the lawn. And, of course, David still lived at home with grandma and grandpa. He was close enough to bike to work. He did not have a car. And when we pulled out of the driveway, he waved to us and he started to push the mower as we drove away. And we got in the car and left. The plan, of course, was to spend the night with relatives in southeastern Ohio on Friday night. And on Saturday, we would attend the wedding, which we did. My dad's cousin was getting married. And then we would return back to central Ohio that Sunday afternoon. And that's exactly what we did. Of course, we do believe, and I'll explain more of this later, that David was murdered probably sometime on July 20th, that Sunday, more than likely, and I'll get the details in the next video. You're wondering why I'm spending a lot of time talking about this weekend and why I choose to share it with you. There's a certain amount of flash memory in the days surrounding trauma that stick with you. And I have not experienced a lot of trauma in my life, but this was trauma for me. It was trauma for all those who loved David and cared for him. So I distinctly remember the wedding vividly that Saturday, July 19th. The next day, Sunday morning, there was another event I'd like to share with you that's fairly poignant. We went to church that Sunday morning, pastored by a friend of ours who lived in Gloucester, Ohio. And a circumstance, as God would have it, the pianist was sick that day, and they had no other pianists. It's a very small church, and we were attending church there with my grandparents. And my grandma Hadaway, who was an excellent pianist, she volunteered to play during the service. Now, this was a very small church. We met in a one-story building that day. I'd never been there before. I think it was some sort of community center or residence, not really sure, but it was a one-story commercial type building that the church rented. My grandma Hadaway volunteered to play the piano that day for the service. Now, she played by ear, and she could play anything. She was gifted. She loved to play hymns, especially. My grandma did not usually play in church a lot. She would always play for her family. She'd play Christmas carols at Christmas, and we'd gather around the piano like those Norman Rockwell type paintings. It was all quite traditional. Yet never to my knowledge did Grandma play around strangers. But that day, July 20th, the day before she found out her son was murdered, she did play for strangers, and it surprised me. I'd never seen her do that before. In a moment that's burned in my mind, one of the hymns we sang and that my grandma played that morning was called "Does Jesus Care?" And it's a song about God's care for us in the midst of suffering. It's an old song written very early in the 20th century. We sang all the stanzas, as we did in those days. And I think it was probably the second or third time I heard that song. It wasn't extremely familiar to me. And even though my family and I, we were Christians, as a 14-year-old, I still had a lot of questions about my faith. I distinctly remember my thoughts during that song. And one of them was this. It's quite a sad song. It's hope and it's comfort, but it's sad. And I was thinking to myself, how is it that there are people in the world who do everything right, but still end up facing unfathomable suffering? How does that happen? Children, families that try to do everything right, yet they end up suffering beyond what they think they could ever experience. And I didn't know it at the time when I was singing that song, but David was probably already dead. His body already in that dumpster and waiting to be discovered on Monday, July 21st. Everything about that weekend that David died, in hindsight, seems strange to me. My grandma playing the piano for strangers at church, far from home. being the last of the family to see David alive that Friday afternoon. And to top it all off, this very sad and contemplative song we sang in that little church that morning, Does Jesus Care? And I'm going to read to you that last stanza, the words that came out of my mouth that day before our lives changed forever. Does Jesus care when I've said goodbye to the dearest on earth to me, and my sad heart aches till it nearly breaks? Is it aught to him? Does he see? And I do believe that he cares. I believe that he compels us to remember those we've loved and lost. And we also cling to the hope of eternal life that God promises to those who believe. And beyond that, I also believe that God would have us protect innocent life, that he would help us bring those who take innocent life to justice. And I'll have more to say about that in the second video. Certainly next time I want to discuss the case, what we know, what we do not know. But for now, I would love for you to just take a moment to honor David's short life, the things I've talked about today. If you're a relative or family member, that I hope you were able to remember something or learn something new about David if you're younger. And I hope that you're able to remember him and certainly pray for all the victims of violent crime and their families. I hope that this video, this experience, in some ways gives comfort to those who are suffering, but also to perhaps bring David justice. Thank you, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.